As I mentioned, Daniel Denham's going to deal with the open forum and the questions that have come up. I will repeat, as I do just about every year, I guess, that this is a period of study, and that's what we intend it to be. It is just dealing with specific subjects that people have asked questions about. We do want people to make comments, and while we want people to try and keep it short and not filibuster in statements that they might want to add to, or additional information that they might want to give, we do encourage people to do that. But if you do, please come to the podium over here. State your name, because there is a microphone that we will pick up and we'll have it on camera that way. But state your name, where you're from, and then make any comments or additional questions that you might ask. But remember that this is a period of study, and thus if there are some disagreements, let's come to the scriptures and with open mind and study these points out. Some areas, of course, there's going to be disagreements with certain aspects and application maybe of Scripture. So we understand that, and we want to be respectful of everyone's views and positions, but we need to always go back to God's Word and accept it for what it says. So with that as kind of a background, we're going to turn it over to Brother Denham at this time.
I want to make one correction concerning the last lesson. My wife reminded me of this. That's what wives are good for, jogging your memory. But that's one of the many good things. But the discussion with Ross Gallagher took place in the home of Bill and Jackie Thornhill. Bill was a deacon of the congregation here at the time, and many of us would go over and play pinochle and things of that nature. And we got into the discussion on the subject there. But well, probably Doug McClish. I don't know. I've had so many fusses out there. Anyway, it was at the home of Bill and Jackie Thornhill. Can governments murder others? That is, in capital punishment. Well, turn over to Romans 13. The question itself begs the question. The question assumes that all killing is murder. That is a supposition that simply is not the case. That's not upheld in the original language. There's a distinction made both in Hebrew and Greek between killing in general and murder. When the law of Moses said, "Thou shalt not kill," the particular Hebrew term used involves the idea of murder. In fact, it is so quoted in the New Testament in various places. "Thou shalt do no murder," and that's what's forbidden. But not all killing, that is slaying, which is a better English word for the idea of slaying an evildoer and things of that nature, execution. Not all slaying is murder. Now look at Romans chapter 13, of course, dealing with civil government. And Paul is emphasizing the place of civil government. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. For there is no power but of God, the powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power resisteth the ordinance of God. And they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. Now watch. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. This is what civil government was ordained for. It oftentimes falls short of this purpose, this ideal intention. For he is the minister of God to thee for good, The civil ruler is a minister of God for thee to good, that is, in order, or for good, in order to bring good about. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid. Be terrified, is the idea. For he beareth not the sword in vain. And this particular word refers to the sword of execution. This isn't even the battle sword that's under consideration. It's the sword of execution. And Brother Floyd Wallace used to say, you don't kiss them with a sword. That's not the intention. You put them to death. The Apostle Paul himself, when he was on trial, said, if I have done anything worthy of death. In other words, he was being accused of doing things that he ought to die for. He said, well, if I've done anything, if they can prove anything against me that I am indeed worthy of death, I refuse not to die. Paul recognized the authority of civil government to properly, authoritatively execute criminals who had done things worthy of death. And so, can governments kill others in the form of capital punishment? Most certainly. Most certainly. In fact, one of the first things stressed after Noah and his family came forth from the ark was that the principle of justice, and the principle of justice has always been the same. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, blood for blood. That principle's never changed, folks. There are aspects to it that involve misapplications. For example, the Jews at the time of Jesus, the rabbis, taught that as long as you stop short of the act, you could hate one another. You could hate a man to the point that you'd like to kill him, you'd like to murder him or whatever, but as long as you don't do the act, then that's all right. But the law forbade murder. It also forbade the attitude behind it, but the law of Moses upheld the principle of justice and made provision for that. And that same principle is found under patriarchy. It's found under the Christian age, or the Mosaic, and it's found under the Christian age. We have any comments, or anyone like to run with it? I guess they're satisfied. I want to also deal with this one in particular. Would you please explain the problems with Stan Crowley's divorce and remarriage views? Stan Crowley's nonsensical, absurd, ridiculous, foolish, I don't know what other adjectives you can come up with because all of those are fitting, doctrine holds that, well, first on marriage divorce, that a marriage is not a marriage until it is consummated in the sex act. That's one aspect of his doctrine. So that, folks, when the preacher announces that that this is Mr. and Mrs., I now present to you Mr. and Mrs. Brown, he lies. They're not married at that point. In fact, they're not even married when they go in and they sign the register at the motel, Mr. and Mrs. Brown. They're not even married when they sign the marriage license, Mr. and Mrs. Brown, or Mr. Brown, and she signs her name, and then do that. They're not married until the sex act is completed, which means that everything working up to that, and I don't want to be graphic about it, but this is how stupid this doctrine is. Everything up until that point that they're doing, and Brother Tom Warren used to use the illustration of they go to the motel, they get in the bathtub together, and all of that leading right on up to the sex act itself. They are committing fornication because they're not married. They're not husband and wife until the act of sex. Now that's the implication of the doctrine. Besides the other absurdities, the case of Mary and Joseph, of course, refutes that. That's one of the problems of the doctrine. As far as divorce is concerned, as David was explaining to us just a little while ago, part of this is to try to get around the civil aspect of everything from the standpoint of having to go to the court and deal with all of this type stuff. holds this nonsense that once you have separated, period, this line of distancing, and it's interesting, he won't tell you what that line of distance is. It's just there. Somewhere locked up in his mind, there's a line of distance that once you cross that line of distance, and this is what he'd say, you are apaluoed. That's what he actually said. You are now divorced. You are put away. And because you are divorced, apaluoed, you cannot remarry. You cannot even really, given that position, reconcile with a woman, because once, he even goes on to say, once apaluoed, always apaluoed. Yeah. Well, just think about the implications of this. He says this applies, and he tries to twist 1 Corinthians 7:5, which doesn't deal with any of this, to teach this doctrine. That is the passage that he appeals to. And he ignores the fact that 1 Corinthians 7:5 is dealing with prayer and fasting. That it is to provide an occasion for prayer and fasting, that you cease coming together as man and wife. You mutually agree to do that in order to devote time to prayer and fasting. But he says this applies to every act of separation. And so if you don't mutually agree to separate for a little while, if you get mad or your wife gets mad and one storms off from the other, then you are apaluo. You're divorced. And once apaluo, you can't be apaluoed again. In fact, an implication of this is, suppose Mr. T gets mad at Mrs. T, and Mr. T gets mad enough that he goes out and actually commits adultery. Mrs. T can't put Mr. T away because when he left, they were already divorced. So there is no innocent party. He can even create the argument. Now catch this. He can get mad over something or just trump it up, get mad, start an argument, get her upset, then use that as an excuse to go commit adultery, and she can't put him away, even though she's the innocent party. That's the implication of this madness. And Southwest thinks this is good doctrine. They support it. They fellowship it. They refuse to oppose it. They refuse to withdraw from it or to mark him as a false teacher. This is kind of nonsense we're dealing with, brethren. And it's no wonder with that type of foolishness. And by the way, Jim Waldron is in fellowship with these folks. Jim admitted in a letter to us, he admitted in a letter to David Brown and myself, that he jumped into this thing concerning contending for the faith in response to Terry Hightower, knowing that Terry was specifically dealing with the Southwest teaching. So Jim would jump to their support, and yet he does not want to have a debate in South Texas because he doesn't want to bring it to their doorstep.
Quote unquote.
Quote unquote.
That's where it needs to be.
That's where it needs to be. He doesn't want it at their doorstep, and quite frankly, I don't think he wants it at his doorstep either. Brother David.
The reason Southwest is mentioning all this stuff with Stan Crowley, he was a student still at Southwest when he was preaching for the Buda congregation. And he had already stirred up a big problem there, he and his son at that congregation. And there was news brought back to the Southwest director at that time, which is very interesting, as well as to the elders. Eventually, it all got to the elders. Their approach to this doctrine was, well, if you'll just be quiet about it, we'll go ahead and graduate. And that's the way they left it. And that's not biblical. There's nothing about that's biblical. But that is not even their specific position. Their position is, well, you might want to go ahead and explain, you've already touched on it, but you might, actually the one that they claim they hold is not Crowley's, but they said it's no big deal.
Yeah, the fellowship Crowley's. That, and that which is ironic, they don't if you apply what they're saying, they won't fellowship us, but they will fellowship Crowley's nonsense. Their position is that a civil divorce on any grounds severs a Matthew 19:6 marriage bond regardless. You can get a divorce not for fornication, and as a result, the man and woman are no longer married in the sight of God. Period. And then when you ask them, well, then how in the world can it be adultery when either one remarries? How can it be ascribed as adultery? That's when you come up with this, well, it's marriage perversion. Well, what do you mean by that? And it's just, or it's legal adultery. Legal, what do you mean by legal adultery? Well, God calls it adultery. You mean God just applies arbitrary definitions and meanings and changes things as it suits his case? Now, brethren, catch the implication of that concerning the ethics and so on. If God can just, that's adultery, but this is not. If he could just arbitrarily change the meaning of a word over here, why not over there? As it suits our needs. The fact of the matter is, they cannot find a single lexicon, lexicographer, dictionary, or anything that will support that use of language.
Right now, what's interesting too, to show you the total confusion, is that just a year and a half ago, it's only been about a year and a half ago, Kevin Colley, who was in school when I was the director there, came to be one of the teachers. He teaches the truth on marriage, divorce, remarriage. At least he did. What he's in print on, he does. And not only that, my last few months there, in a series of articles that appeared each week for a number of weeks, I addressed in the bulletin every week, for weeks, this very idea, not Crowley's, but the idea of who gets to the courthouse first type thing as to who can apply Matthew 19:9 in a case. And I dealt with that. Nobody had a problem with that then. The truth of the matter is, they've got down to this silly thing on fellowship. This hitting the whole brotherhood, brethren, is almost got to the point that you can believe that, and you can believe that, and you can believe that, and we all teach it. Now, I disagree with you, and you're wrong, and you think I'm wrong, but let's just keep on fellowshipping with one another. That's where they are. There's the problem with all the rest of it.
Since David didn't identify himself, that was David Brown. He's from Spring, Texas. I'm Michael Hatcher from Pensacola. But his preface makes good introduction what I was going to say, because in talking with someone, they stated that the position that we hold on this subject is going to lead people to hell. Now, if you think that individual would debate the subject, you're sadly mistaken. Nor would he put someone up to debate it. Now, why? If we are leading people to hell, then why won't they debate it?
He's not the only one that said that. We've got articles by some of these characters where they have accused us of being false teachers and this and that, and leading people to hell, and will not deal with it. Simply will not address it. One of the sidelights to some of this foolishness, David referred to the race to the courthouse, is that some of these brethren actually hold that you must not only beat the guilty party to the courthouse and file, it has to be on the record that it is for fornication. That's assuming the state will even let you do that. That you must prove that it is fornication, and that it must be gavelled by the judge on that grounds, and it has to be in the legal document that it is granted, or it's null and void. You can know that your spouse is guilty as an innocent party, and you have no recourse. You don't beat them to the courthouse first and do X, Y, and Z, just in the exact order. And all of it subject, and assuming that the court clerk doesn't mess up and misfile it. And if the court clerk messes up, then you're messed up on that end. Or if the courthouse burns down. Brother.
Doug McClish, the aged one from Denton, Texas. Just on the last point you made, I've always thought it was an effective way to put this thing into context. To assume that one lived in Soviet Russia and the state enacted a law saying that all marriages are now illegal. Could one still cohabit with his wife? He's still bound by God, isn't he, to that wife and that wife to that husband? Wouldn't state law overrule divine law in such a case? If not in that case, why in any case? But the thing I really want to say, bringing what David said a moment ago about the fellowship aspect of this, you just do this and this and this and this, and we'll all just get along together anyway. Ken Ratcliffe is Secretary Treasurer and now President of the Gospel Journal Incorporated. He is one of the preachers and an elder at Schertz, Texas. And he was one of the elders that hired Brother Stan Crowley, fresh out of Southwest School of Bible Studies. The church at Schertz, it's hard to say, supported Stan financially while he was going to school. Brother Ratcliffe has told me in more than one conversation that he did not know Stan Crowley held these positions when they hired him. If we had known it, we would not have hired him, he has further told me. He has told in the presence of several witnesses, Dave Brown is one of them, Glenn Park will be here later, he's another, that either Stan Crowley or he, one, will be gone from the Schertz church by X date. That date passed about 3 years ago, I think, 4 years ago. And Brother Ken Ratcliffe is still an elder in that congregation and is Stan Crowley's associate preacher. And Brother Stan Crowley is still there. So the fellowship aspect, it's just a rippling effect that has overcome all sorts of former barriers that brethren had on the subject of fellowship and on error and truth.
David Brown, Spring, Texas. We were, the Spring elders and myself were contacted by the Schertz elders in May of 2005 for the express purpose of coming. They drove all the way to Spring, which is what, 3-hour drive, to meet, and we met for several hours in our library to help try to persuade, and they brought some other people with them, some other men with them. The one elder, I forgot his name now, Doug, you remember? Anyway, to persuade him relative to the Bible. And Brother Ken Ratcliffe was behind every bit of that, and was still standing right where we stood at that time. Right. Then we met later on at Lynn's place, another pretty good drive for us, and the two men who were serving as elders of the Beauty Cow congregation met with us at that time. They've been directly involved with Stan Crowley in this whole thing, and that helped carry it back to Southwest to let them know what was going on at that stage. This is May, June of 2005. And Brother Ken Ratcliffe came over to that meeting, both the elders from Utica, me and the elders from Spring, Dan Parker, and we met, and even Lynn even offered him, said, well, look, if you can't stay there anymore, we're just, 20 miles away maybe, you can come place membership here. That's how strong that Brother Ratcliffe was in seeing this thing, and that's when he made the statement before all of us that either one of us would go, is what he said. And yet after, for some reason, here's the magic number, July 20th. July 20th, 2005. The whole world switched back the other direction, and now you can just about fellowship everybody. You know, July 20th, 2005 was when they met and got rid of Brother Dub and Brother Watson, and from that point, when they got rid of both of you, kicked out, pushed out, whatever, and now it's all switched around. Literally, you can mark that date. It all switches around from that point forward to where you can believe one way and you can think he's wrong, and this means both of you's wrong, and it's all right. Just everybody's one big happy family now. Brethren, do you realize if Reuben Shelley knows about all this stuff, how he must be laughing down his sleeve? He's saying, I've got them. They're just about 30 years behind me, but I've got them.
Ken Chumley from Belvedere, South Carolina. Just going along with this, at the time this was all going on, the church at Schertz was helping in my support. And when this all came about with respect to what had happened with Gospel Journal and the position of Stan Crowley, I wrote the elders a letter. Well, first of all, I wrote Ken Ratcliffe a letter. And then later on, I sent a letter to the elders. And I was asking about their positions on these things. And I was told very clearly in the letter that Ken Ratcliffe wrote back to me that he said, it's not the position of one who's being supported to question the elders who are supporting it. Elders can question the preacher, but not the preacher the elders. And needless to say, when it came to this was right before the end of the year, they decided they weren't going to support me anymore. I was already decided I wasn't going to have it anyway. But the point being, that was their response. They did not want to know. 2005, yeah.
Brother Dub, I'll recognize you in just a moment. I want to pick up something that Dub had said concerning the Soviet Union. 1918 did just that for a little while. They dissolved all marriages. During the height of the French Revolution, they did the same thing. Of course, chaos ensued. You had men whose wives were being claimed by other men, and duels being fought, and killings taking place, and they decided we better do something about that. So the Soviet Union, and France too, France under the Napoleonic Code issued theirs, and there's some strange quirks in its divorce law. The Russians reinstituted it as civil law only. And they said there's no creator because they ruled that God didn't exist. Therefore, there's no civil or no religious authority or no religious power involved in the process. It's purely something we grant as the state to you. And I wonder what these brethren would do under that type of situation. We may be headed to. That this is a civil, not a civil right. This is a civil permission or permissive situation that we're simply granting because we're such wonderful people. Privilege. It's a civil privilege. Good work. I want to put a name before you in just a moment. Been reading on a man that you may be familiar with by the name of Heinrich Schleiermacher. Not Schleiermacher, Heinrich Schliemann. Not Schleiermacher, but Schliemann. And I want to say something about that because this is fascinating on this case. Brother Doug.
I've tried to forget some of these things, but these are jogging some more memories. When I was still editing the Gospel Journal, this would have been about 2004 probably, I got an article from Brother Ken Ratcliffe by email one day, and he said this is a hypothetical situation, and he outlined a marriage, divorce, remarriage situation to me and said, what would be your opinion on this? Well, it was a situation in which a man had been unfaithful to his wife, and he filed for divorce and got the divorce, and would she or would she not be eligible to be remarried because her husband had been unfaithful to her, but he had gotten the divorce. Well, I said, she's the innocent party. It doesn't matter who got to the courthouse first. He has committed adultery. Divine law supersedes state law in every case. He wrote back and said, this is exactly my view of the matter. And he said, the reason I wrote you is because our preacher, Stan Crowley, has had a counseling session with a couple in the congregation at Schertz and has told them that she has no right to remarry in this case. And we have told our preacher, Brother Stan Crowley, that he is not to counsel any marriage, divorce, and remarriage cases from here on. Can you imagine a congregation where the elders have a preacher in the pulpit and they will not allow him to counsel husbands and wives?
On Heinrich Schliemann. Of course, Heinrich Schliemann was the one who discovered Troy. If you've watched any of the History Channel movies and all of that type of stuff dealing with Troy. But the man was quite a character. He was an entrepreneur and an industrialist, had the multi-millionaire. He married a woman, a Russian woman, under Russian Orthodoxy. The marriage was celebrated with a Russian Orthodox priest, which under Russian imperial law at that time meant that they could not divorce, period. That's what Russian law held. On top of that, it held that if they did divorce, that they could not remarry, and that any remarriage would be null and void under Russian law. He decided he wanted to get rid of her, Katrina. And so he went to the United States. And this is where a little bit of Dave Miller type stuff comes in. He got some friends of his in New York to lie that he was a resident of the United States, that he'd been a resident for 6 years. And so they gave him American citizenship. They lied. For what? So he'd get a divorce. He went to Indianapolis, Indiana, filed for his divorce. Now, Indiana had some wild divorce laws back in the 1860s, and they were in the process of trying to change that because of the situation that was published. Brother David carried the material on the C.L. Luce where he was recording it. He referred to a situation of a man who had run off from his wife, or a woman had run off from her husband in New York, had run off with another man, got married in Illinois, then they moved back. They got their divorce in Illinois, or Indiana, got married, moved back to New York, and the aggrieved husband killed the other man, killed the gigolo. And so this was the situation Brother Luce was dealing with, and pointing out that the laws were too lax on divorce, that these people were still married, the original couple was still married in God's sight and ought to have been viewed as such by the court in Indiana. At any event, Schliemann was taking advantage of the same type of divorce law. He goes in, and the legislators of Indiana have already virtually passed another law that's going to go into effect that would make what he was doing illegal. They said through some special benefits that he offered to them, they pocketed the legislation. And he wound up getting his divorce within 3 months, even though the law in the books required him a year to be there. He got the divorce. Now I wonder what our brethren would do with that. Because according to Russian law, he wasn't divorced, and that was what he married under. And yet, according to Indiana state law, he was considered divorced even though it was illegally obtained and fraudulently obtained. But that's what the judge decided. Let him deal with it. Brother Skip.
Skip Francis, Liberal, Kansas. I'd like to make sure that part's clear. Because of some issues in our part of the country, I have had occasion over the past couple of months to do a considerable amount of research on the Stan Crowley situation. Back in the hotel room on my laptop, I have all the documents that I'm going to mention, and if anybody cares to see them, I'll be happy to show them to you. But one of them is a manuscript that Brother Lynn Parker produced for David Brown in the Contending for the Faith lectures back, I think, about either 05 or 06. In that, it's 67, 68 pages of material that deals expressly with the Crowley doctrine. And especially with a lectureship in which Stan Crowley presented this information at Beeville in 04. I think it was in 04. Now, at that particular lectureship, another individual that was on that lectureship and sitting there that day was Ken Ratcliffe, who was at the time an elder with overseeing Stan Crowley's work, and thanked Lynn Parker for that material. The other side of this that I wanted to mention was a letter that Brother Tim Kidwell also had published in the Contending for the Faith, in which he explained a meeting that he had with Stan Crowley and a couple of other members present, in which Stan Crowley said concerning this, what I might add, rather odd spin he has on marriage, divorce, and remarriage, that his doctrine was worth splitting the church over. Those are his words.
Excellent point.
Could I make a
Yes, one.
I think that I was the first one to do this. I was scheduled to be in a gospel meeting in church, and I think that was in about 2004, I believe it was. And Crowley had just moved there, maybe a little earlier than that. I can't remember now, too much water under the bridge. But I had all of this material that had come directly from the Beautiful congregation, sent to me by Tim Kidwell. It involved an afternoon debate, which is on tape, which after Crowley and his son made their presentation, and Tim Kidwell got up to make his and reply, they walked out the door and never would listen to what he had to say. But I've got the tape, video. But I sent all of this stuff back way early, before I ever went down to hold that meeting. Then I stayed in Brother Ratcliffe's house, and those who have been there know how it's made. It's a big house, and one end of it they just put him there, your place when you're there. He came in one morning, knocked on the door, and pulled up a chair and sat down and said, "I want you to go over this again," because he'd already been going through it before I ever got there. He knew about all of that stuff and understood exactly what it was a long time before 2005. I know he did. He knew all about that. And that's when he first made the statement to me, which he made later to Dove and others, if we had known. He emphatically said that more than once. If we had known he had believed this, we would have never employed him.
One of the interesting sidelights to all of this is that on the discussion list, as these things have been brought up and thrashed out, various aspects of it dealt with grammatically and so on, that even more absurd positions have come out from some of the defenders of the Southwest doctrine. One particular elder down at Cedar Bayou took the position, I assume he's still an elder there, Dan Galloway, he's not there, or where is he?
well,
He's there. Anyway, he was an elder at the time. He took the position that Herod and Herodias were in a Matthew 19:6 marriage. He was arguing a marriage is a marriage and a divorce is a divorce. And they were married, so they were in a Matthew 19:6 marriage. And so it was pointed out to him, then you have Jesus said, what God's joined together, let not man put asunder. And yet John the Baptist saying, it's not lawful for thee to have them. So God inspired John to tell them to separate. Jesus was telling them to stay together. Go figure. All right. Any other comments on this? Well, another sidelight, the Schliemann's thing, deal. He had gone in, when he went to Indianapolis, he bought a house. He also bought an interest in a business. I forget what the business was. But just as soon as he had the divorce in hand, he sold both and left the country within a week. He lied to the judge. He lied to the legislature. He lied to the federal government and got away with it. And at the same time, while he was in Indiana waiting for his divorce to come through, he wrote to a Greek Orthodox bishop, archbishop, who was a buddy of his because of excavations he'd been involved in at Mycenae, to find him a wife. He wanted to find a Greek woman. He was tired of dealing with those old rough, tough Russian women. He wanted a young Greek woman who, amazingly, if you read some of the discussions of it, amazingly was to be someone just like the archbishop's sister. And that some believed that he was wanting the archbishop to break up his sister's marriage so that she would be available for this old coot. And that's what he was. He was much older than the women he was marrying. But anyway, this is the kind of stuff that these fellows would in effect say, well, civil law trumps God's law. The poor aggrieved wife over in Russia, assuming she was perfectly innocent in the process, she can't do anything about it, this old scoundrel, despite what he was doing. She found out about the divorce, came to the States and tried to fight it, but not having an American lawyer, but trying to operate as a Russian under American law, she filed the wrong charge against it, and it was just thrown out. He was not really an American citizen. But that's the Dave Miller deal, by the way. Let's see. Are we subject to the Great Commission? There's some others we're going to get to tomorrow. Are we subject to the Great Commission today? Yes. I know where that's going. But I do not believe, and I don't hold the position, that the world in Matthew chapter 28, verse 20, refers to the Jewish age. I don't believe you can sustain that grammatically. I don't believe you can sustain that as far as the meaning of the term. I know of brethren that do, and providing they don't go overboard with that and come up with some wacky doctrines that we're not therefore to preach the gospel and this and that. I don't have any problem with that, but there are some things I'm hearing out there that I am concerned about. It may be a case we need to see how much further they're going to go with some of these things. Various writers, I believe Campbell for once, believed that the age, under the end of the world or under the end of the age was the Jewish age. I know that was the position of Brother Camp, but they would also turn right around and say, but the Great Commission itself still continues to the end of time and was not limited to just the Jewish age. May a woman teach didasko a man? Again, depending on what context the word is used, yes, and in some contexts, no. In 1 Timothy 2 verse 12, didaskein, where it is used in an official sense concerning the worship of the congregation, no. She is not to function as a preacher or teacher over a man in any situation. In fact, the construction there literally says, I suffer not a woman to teach nor in any other way usurp authority or exercise authority over a male, as distinct from a female, andros. And but does that mean she can't do any teaching at all? Well, please explain to me then, Ananias and or Priscilla and Aquila. I know they try to say, Ananias and Sapphira. I know that they try to say that that Aquila did all the teaching, but that just won't hold. That's silly. Notice in the same chapter, this chapter 18, book of Acts, says, and Silas and Timothy, when Silas and Timothy were come down from Macedonia. Well, I guess only Silas came down because he was the one that was mentioned first. That it?